This story is not about celebrity wealth in the ordinary sense. It is about what happens when money grows large enough to become infrastructure, protection, and leverage, shaping identity long before adulthood and turning family into a controlled system rather than a safe place. Watch until the end, because we will reveal how wealth inside the Beckham world is used not just to buy comfort, but to quietly manage power, loyalty, and who is allowed to define the truth. A billionaire legacy under pressure. At the surface, this story looks like celebrity family tension, but that assumption collapses once you understand the scale of power surrounding Brooklyn Beckham, because this is not a household shaped by emotion first. It is a system engineered around capital, access, and narrative control, where conflict is not just personal but destabilizing to a global asset network valued in the high hundreds of millions. Brooklyn was not born into wealth that simply paid for comfort. He was born into a family structure where money functions as infrastructure, built by David Beckham, whose post-football empire exceeds $450 million, including long-term endorsement contracts, equity stakes in global brands, and ownership in Inter Miami CF valued at over $1 billion, assets designed to generate influence, cross-border access, and permanent relevance rather than short-term income. That infrastructure extends into physical mobility, with David Beckham operating a Gulfstream G650 valued at approximately $70 million, not as a luxury jet but as a continuity tool, allowing unrestricted intercontinental movement, private negotiations, and schedule insulation, a capability that removes dependency on commercial systems and ensures the family brand remains operational regardless of geography or public pressure. Parallel to this, Victoria Beckham constructed a separate but tightly integrated power structure through her fashion empire, with a brand valuation estimated near $100 million, supported by controlled image rights, selective partnerships, and centralized creative authority, a model where perception is not organic but managed, refined, and protected with the same discipline as financial capital. The family's residential assets reinforce this logic, including a London townhouse portfolio exceeding $60 million and a Cotswolds estate valued near $12 million, property selected not for extravagance, but for jurisdictional stability, privacy zoning, and security layering, functioning as controlled environments where exposure is minimized and access is regulated. Brooklyn grew up inside this architecture, where every appearance, absence, and affiliation carried brand consequence, and where personal identity was never isolated from commercial value, meaning that recent public distance does not read as rebellion in the traditional sense, but as friction inside a system designed to suppress unpredictability. This is why the current fallout matters, because when a figure raised inside a legacy apparatus begins to step outside its narrative perimeter, the risk is not embarrassment, it is loss of control, and the question shifts from family disagreement to whether inherited power can survive internal defection without restructuring itself entirely. Comment below whether you think being born into extreme wealth creates opportunity or quietly removes the ability to choose who you become. The wedding drama that started everything. At this level of wealth, weddings are never just celebrations. They are public infrastructure events designed to align families, capital, and narrative control, and that is why the Palm Beach wedding of Brooklyn Beckham and Nicola Peltz mattered long before a single guest arrived. The venue alone signaled the scale, a Palm Beach oceanfront estate valued at approximately $76 million, chosen not for romance but for jurisdictional privacy, zoning insulation, and controlled access, a property capable of hosting a global guest list while remaining sealed from paparazzi intrusion, turning geography into a defensive asset rather than a backdrop. The wedding itself carried an estimated total cost exceeding $4 million, covering custom-built security perimeters, encrypted communications for high-profile guests, and restricted airspace coordination, expenses that exist to ensure reputational containment, because at this tier, a single uncontrolled image can devalue years of brand construction. Wardrobe became a flashpoint because clothing at this level is never symbolic alone. The bride's gown was expected to function as image alignment between two power families, with custom couture typically valued between $150,000 and $300,000, not as fabric, but as narrative authority, determining whose aesthetic language defines the moment and whose influence frames the visual legacy. The controversy surrounding Victoria Beckham was not about a dress failing to appear, but about creative control, because in elite families, design decisions translate directly into hierarchy, authorship, and which legacy is visually centered in history. Music, often dismissed as atmosphere, carried its own strategic weight. Live orchestration and curated performances for weddings of this scale routinely exceed $500,000, not to entertain guests, but to script emotion, ensuring that moments unfold within a controlled sensory arc rather than spontaneous unpredictability. The first dance, widely discussed afterward, became controversial precisely because it violated expectation management. In environments engineered for precision, unscheduled participation reads not as affection but as narrative disruption, a breach of protocol inside an event designed to project unity and hierarchy simultaneously. Transportation logistics further reflected this operational mindset, with chartered private aircraft and helicopter transfers costing an estimated $1.2 million, enabling staggered arrivals, secure routing, and isolation of guest groups. A system built to prevent unsanctioned interaction and minimize off-script encounters. What appeared publicly as a beautiful but tense wedding functioned privately as a stress test, revealing incompatible governance styles between two wealthy families, one operating through centralized image control, the other through financial scale and discretion. By the time the ceremony concluded, the conflict was already embedded, because when a wedding at this altitude exposes friction, it does not fade with time. It hardens into structural tension, setting the stage for everything that followed, and quietly transforming a single day into the origin point of a much larger fracture. Choosing sides, marriage versus the Beckham brand. Choosing sides inside extreme wealth rarely looks like conflict at first. It presents as proximity, access, and which systems quietly begin to shape daily life. And that is exactly what changed when Brooklyn Beckham aligned himself more closely with Nicola Peltz and, by extension, her family's capital architecture. The Peltz family operates on a different axis of power, led by Nelson Peltz, whose net worth exceeds $1.7 billion, built through activist investing, boardroom leverage, and long-term control of corporate governance, rather than image monetization, a model where influence is exercised privately and consequences are managed behind closed doors. That difference becomes tangible through physical assets, including a New York penthouse valued at approximately $25 million, structured with private elevator access, layered security, and restricted sightlines. A residence designed not for display but for controlled interaction, ensuring that meetings, relationships, and personal life remain insulated from external scrutiny. Outside the city, the family maintains a Bedford estate in New York State, valued near $90 million, spanning hundreds of acres, protected by private security teams and exclusion zoning, a property that functions as a self-contained environment, allowing family life, negotiations, and recovery from media pressure to occur without exposure or narrative leakage. Mobility further reinforces this system, with access to a Bombardier Global 8000 valued at roughly $80 million, configured for ultra-long-range flight, secure communications, and onboard medical capability. An aircraft that exists to guarantee operational continuity, ensuring movement without reliance on commercial schedules, foreign infrastructure, or public visibility. For Brooklyn, proximity to this structure represents more than comfort, because it introduces a model of wealth where authority flows from financial gravity rather than public approval, where silence is protection and distance is strategy, contrasting sharply with the brand-centric ecosystem he was raised inside. This shift reframes the tension with David Beckham and Victoria Beckham, not as emotional estrangement, but as a divergence between two governance philosophies, one built on constant visibility and narrative alignment, the other on discretion, leverage, and minimal surface area. In systems like these, loyalty is not declared, it is inferred through presence, residence, and which infrastructure absorbs daily life. And as Brooklyn's center of gravity moved, The gap widened not through argument, but through incompatibility of control frameworks. At this altitude, marriage becomes a jurisdictional decision, because choosing a partner also means choosing which capital system will shape risk, privacy, and long-term autonomy, and once that alignment shifts, reconciliation is no longer about emotion, but about whether two power structures can coexist without compromising their core logic. By the time this realignment becomes visible to the public, it is already complete internally, setting the stage for consequences that extend far beyond family dynamics and into the future architecture of identity, access, and control. Silence, control, and narrative tension. Silence at this level is never accidental. It is engineered, budgeted, and enforced through systems designed to outlast emotion, and the absence of official statements surrounding Brooklyn Beckham is the clearest signal that this conflict moved long ago from family space into operational territory. Inside global celebrity families, narrative silence is maintained through professional architecture, including long-term contracts with elite reputation management firms that routinely cost $2 to $4 million per year. Structures built not to respond to controversy, but to delay it, fragment it, and reduce its velocity until public interest loses cohesion, a strategy that treats time itself as a defensive asset. Legal containment reinforces that layer, with family-wide non-disclosure frameworks and image use restrictions often valued at seven-figure annual retainers, ensuring that internal disputes do not leak through secondary voices such as staff, associates, or extended networks, a system designed to preserve deniability and narrative ambiguity rather than public resolution. Control also extends into ownership of digital identity, where image rights, licensing approvals, and archival content are centralized through holding entities that can restrict or authorize visibility at will, assets that may not appear on balance sheets but routinely represent tens of millions of dollars in long-term brand equity, functioning as levers over how history is remembered rather than how it unfolds in real time. Against this structure, Brooklyn's silence reads differently, because independence in this environment does not require confrontation, it requires selective absence, achieved through reduced participation in family-aligned campaigns, disengagement from legacy partnerships, and the quiet redirection of personal branding towards smaller, controlled platforms, choices that signal autonomy without triggering immediate retaliation. This asymmetry creates tension, because while silence protects centralized power, it also exposes its limits, especially when one participant no longer relies on the same approval channels, transforming quiet into friction rather than harmony. Physical distance becomes part of the strategy, with access to short-term luxury residences in Los Angeles valued between $8 and $12 million, leased rather than owned, assets chosen for flexibility, privacy zoning, and rapid exit capability, allowing movement without long-term entanglement and serving as transitional infrastructure rather than permanent settlement. Security adapts accordingly, shifting from family-embedded protection to independent close protection teams costing approximately $1.5 million annually, a configuration that prioritizes personal autonomy over collective oversight and subtly marks a boundary between shared legacy and individual jurisdiction. What emerges is not open conflict, but parallel systems, operating side by side without alignment, one optimized for brand preservation through silence, the other for identity recalibration through distance. In this phase, control is not asserted through statements or rebuttals, but through who speaks less, who controls archives, who owns the platforms, and who can afford to wait. Silence here is not the absence of action, it is action refined to its most efficient form, delaying exposure while pressure accumulates beneath the surface, preparing the ground for a moment when restraint either solidifies authority or reveals its fragility. And that unresolved tension is what carries this story into its next stage. The cost of walking away from privilege. Walking away from privilege does not feel expensive at first. It feels quiet, even liberating, because the true cost of elite protection is rarely visible until it is gone. And that is the position Brooklyn Beckham now occupies as he moves beyond the gravitational pull of a family empire built to absorb risk on his behalf. For years, access to the Beckham system meant automatic insulation, including placement within private brand incubation frameworks that can cost $500,000 to $1 million per year, structures designed to test, reposition, and relaunch personal ventures without reputational damage, allowing experimentation while failure remained invisible to the public. Stepping outside that structure removes not income, but risk buffering, because without centralized backing, every project must stand on its own commercial merit, often requiring independent capital commitments, such as self-funded creative studios or production partnerships that routinely demand $2 to $3 million upfront. Investments that exist not to generate immediate profit, but to establish proof of competence in markets that reward credibility over surname. Legal exposure also changes, as family-aligned legal umbrellas that typically operate on annual retainers exceeding $2 million are replaced by individualized representation, shifting the burden of contract negotiation, liability containment, and intellectual property defense onto a single entity rather than a consolidated network, increasing both cost and vulnerability. Security transforms in parallel because legacy protection teams function as shared infrastructure, while independent security requires standalone contracts, often $800,000 to $2 million annually, focused narrowly on personal safety rather than brand perimeter defense, reducing scope while increasing per-unit expense. Even lifestyle assets begin to signal uncertainty rather than dominance, with reliance on short-term luxury rentals priced at $60,000 to $90,000 per month, chosen for flexibility rather than permanence, indicating a phase where mobility is prioritized over territorial stability, a subtle but telling shift in how power is expressed. Professional credibility becomes the most fragile asset because elite families often subsidize perception through controlled introductions, curated endorsements, and strategic silence, mechanisms that cannot be replicated easily or cheaply, leaving individuals exposed to harsher evaluation cycles where audience patience is limited and narratives solidify quickly. Education and skill signaling attempt to compensate through enrollment in elite private mentorship programs, culinary institutes, or creative residencies that can cost $200,000 to $400,000 per cycle, assets designed to convert effort into legitimacy, but which lack the instant authority of inherited validation. What emerges is not poverty, but exposure, a state where wealth remains intact, but certainty disappears, where every decision carries visible consequence, and where identity must be constructed without the invisible scaffolding that once absorbed mistakes. This is the hidden price of autonomy at the top, because freedom inside elite systems is not defined by how much you own, but by how much protection you are willing to surrender. And once that protection is removed, the margin for error narrows dramatically. In this space between privilege and independence, outcomes are no longer pre-managed, and the next phase of this story will reveal whether separation creates self-authored authority or simply exposes how dependent power truly was on the system left behind. What the Beckham fallout really reveals. The most revealing part of this fallout is not the disagreement itself, but what it exposes about how power actually functions inside elite families, because when wealth reaches this scale, conflict is no longer emotional, it becomes structural, and the situation surrounding Brooklyn Beckham illustrates that legacy is less an inheritance and more a governance system. In families of this tier, legacy is protected through legal architecture long before it is tested publicly, often via family trusts valued in excess of $300 million, vehicles designed to centralize ownership, limit unilateral decision-making, and ensure that control remains intact even when personal relationships fracture, proving that wealth here exists to outlast individual choice. Image protection operates alongside capital protection, with archival rights, naming rights, and historical footage managed through intellectual property holding companies that can be worth $50 to $100 million in projected lifetime value. Assets that determine not only how the past is monetized, but who has permission to reference it, shaping memory as carefully as revenue. Philanthropic structures further reinforce control, with private foundations funded at tens of millions of dollars annually, serving dual roles as tax-efficient capital vehicles and reputation stabilizers, allowing families to project moral authority while maintaining centralized decision power, a system where generosity and governance quietly coexist. Physical symbolism plays its part as well, through heritage assets such as high-value art collections exceeding $30 million, or rare animals like championship-grade horses priced between $500,000 and $2 million each. holdings that function as cultural anchors, signaling continuity, taste, and permanence beyond market cycles, reminding observers that this wealth is not transactional, it is generational. What this reveals is that freedom inside these families is conditional, because access to protection, capital, and narrative insulation depends on alignment, and when alignment breaks, the system does not collapse, it contracts, preserving itself while isolating deviation. The illusion most people carry is that extreme wealth expands choice, but in practice, it often narrows it, because the more resources committed to preserving legacy, the less tolerance exists for unpredictability, individuality, or public divergence, turning privilege into a carefully managed corridor rather than an open field. This is why the Beckham fallout resonates beyond celebrity culture, because it mirrors a universal pattern among dynastic families, where success demands compliance and independence carries hidden costs that only become visible once protection is withdrawn. In the end, the question is not who is right or wrong, but whether any individual born into a global brand can ever truly separate personal identity from inherited power without triggering systemic resistance. Let us know in the comments whether you believe extreme wealth ultimately creates freedom or quietly replaces it with control disguised as protection. This story exposes 3 hard truths about extreme wealth. First, money at this level is not stored, it is deployed to control environments, reduce risk, and keep influence operational even during personal conflict. Second, legacy wealth rarely equals freedom, because the systems built to protect reputation often become mechanisms of control that shape behavior, manage silence, and punish deviation. Third, when identity is funded by a family empire, breaking away does not mean losing luxury, it means losing insulation, narrative protection, and long-term security. In the ultra-wealthy world, power is not loud, it is engineered, maintained through silence, selective visibility, and strategic distance. If this perspective changed how you see wealth and family influence, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And in the next part, we go deeper into another circle of elite families where private money quietly rewrites authority, loyalty, and the future of those born inside it.